a podcast about amazing people from an incredible state. Amazing Arizonans with Mike Broomhead.
Another edition of Amazing Arizonans, and a name you're probably going to recognize in Karrin Taylor Robson. Thanks so much for doing this.
Well, thank you for having me.
There's so many different directions I can go with you in this, and I don't know how much you're willing to go with your personal life, but your success and single mom and the things where you started. Do you mind talking about what drives you? Because you're so driven.
What drives me is really my upbringing and my parents. You know, they were the world's best role models. You know, I was recently asked to write something about, you know, an intro to a book of vignettes about me written by other people. And I started writing it, and I said, I was born with privilege, American privilege. We had nothing. We had opportunity. And I had two parents. I was blessed with two phenomenal parents that modeled for me and my siblings what it means to be an American. And that, to be thankful for what we have, to appreciate what we have, to understand American exceptionalism and the unique responsibility that brings to us. And I was given every opportunity from the time I was literally 5 years old to work. I've had so many jobs I can't even count, and I thank God every day for those jobs because it allowed me to make the most of my talents and skills, and it served me well. I tell my kids, opportunities are out there if you go seek them and work hard, and you have an obligation really to use the talents that God has given you. And you have an obligation to give back. And I look at the opportunities I was afforded, and I look at the next generation behind us and say, wow, we are leaving them an absolute mess. So that motivates me every day. You leave it better than you found it. That was a life lesson that was instilled in me at a very young age. And, I'm the youngest of four. And every one of my siblings has the same approach and attitude. I have a brother in Texas who served on a city council. My brother here, Andy Kanasik, served on the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors for 20 years. My father was in elected office and a public servant for 22 years. And so it's just something that's modeled for us. My sister has been very, very active in grassroots political activities. And that's just what we do. And we're all, I think, at our core, thankful for the blessings we've been given.
What was your first job?
Okay, this might be revealing a little too much. People might think I'm strange, but my father had several pharmacies in downtown Mesa before Walgreens and CVS were on every corner. And so, back in the day, the pharmacist was the most trusted member of the community, but he would take me to work. I worked at the drugstores, delivering prescriptions to shut-ins, otherwise known as drug mules today. Yeah. My parents would probably be committed for, child breaking.
For allowing you to do that?
Child labor laws or something. But we would walk or ride our bikes to deliver prescriptions to the shut-ins and to nursing homes. Just taking out the trash, sweeping the floors. Mm-hmm. But I also remember when I was, I think, in first grade, I would buy these little erasers from my dad's drugstore for a nickel. I'd take orders from my classmates. I'd buy them for a nickel. I'd take them to school and sell them for a dime. And I had this little racket going until the nuns discovered what I was doing, and I got in trouble because I was taking all their milk money. So I got in trouble. So they shut me down.
So you were an entrepreneur at a young age.
Yeah.
I had my first job when I was 12. Under the table at a Chinese restaurant because I just, like you, my mother, I was raised by a single mom. My parents were married until I was about 14. But we were raised in my formative years. My mother had the best work ethic of anybody I'd ever been around. Not a lot of marketable skills. Didn't have anything. We were broke. She worked 3 jobs, and all she really could do was survive. But she was so good at it. We lived in really horrible neighborhoods and ratty apartments, but it was always clean. And my mother always drilled into us that poor doesn't mean dirty. And there was a sense of pride she had in herself. She drove a car that was horrible. It was like a 15-year-old powder blue Gremlin. None of the tires matched, but it was always a safe car to drive. She got herself to work. That taught me more than anything else survival skills, and that there is pride in working hard. That your pride doesn't come from the amount on your paycheck. It comes from earning your paycheck.
Absolutely. There's no question. No question. I remember, as a family, we didn't have much. My father was a pharmacist. He went into public service in an elected office when I was in first grade.
We know how much money they make.
They made $6,000. In fact, I think it was not even $6,000 when he got into the state legislature. And he often had to pay his replacement pharmacist more than he was making down at the legislature. So we learned early the value of sacrifice. We would joke with my mother, God rest her soul, she passed away 4 years ago, but, we would always be clipping coupons. We'd watch what we spent at the grocery store. We'd go to what we called, we fondly referred to the used bread place, the wholesome, bakery thrift shop where they would take it off the shelves in the
day old
grocery
bread.
store. Yep. But we called it the used bread place, which kind of had an interesting connotation. But it was all good. It wasn't.
My mom collected green stamps. We would go to the green stamp store.
I did too.
Yeah.
And I remember, licking those green stamps and putting them on
the
those
books.
Yep, fill in the books. And it was really good. It really taught you to appreciate what you have. And, my parents would also give us quote unquote opportunities. I remember my oldest sister had gone to Europe for a semester abroad when she was a student at the University of Arizona. And she was working, I forget all the details, but she was working in Ireland. And my parents said to the rest of us, we're going to go visit her. If you'd like to come, you're welcome to join us, but you have to pay your own way. We're like, well, that's kind of a, nice invitation. But I was in 9th grade at the time. And I remember to this day, that plane ticket cost me $916, which was a fortune back then.
Yeah.
And I did it by recycling stuff, newspapers and cans before that was a thing, cleaning the neighbors' houses. I mean, I earned every penny of it and made me a better person. I appreciated that trip a lot more.
Isn't it interesting when we look back at the difficult times? I moved here to be a rodeo cowboy of all things, and I did that on the weekends. I had a job as an electrician, and there was a time when my roommate and I, who were rodeoing together, we'd be at the apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning after getting back from feeding bulls and stuff. Hungry and tired and exhausted, and eating store-brand macaroni and cheese because we didn't have anything else. I'm sure at that time it felt horrible, but I look back at those times in my life as the best days.
They were great. Because then you have this innate confidence that you can survive anything, that you can do anything.
And truly, everything you have is yours.
Right.
There's that old line in the country song that says, "I don't have a lot, but what I have is mine."
That's right.
There's significance in that.
That's right.
So then what? Because the success for you and the things that you've accomplished, can you walk us down that path of getting to where you've gotten to?
Okay, so when I was back to college, I, worked my tail off, multiple jobs, and then I, through a series of circumstances, was talked into running for student body president at ASU, which I did. Now, I had already applied for graduation. I think I had even ordered my cap and gown. So I was supposed to graduate. Then I, on this dare or whatever it was, ran. I ran against 5 guys and I won. And turns out that you need to be a student to be the student body president. So I couldn't graduate. So I stayed there, but it was through the series of everything I did that allowed me to compete and win. And then that led me on my path and my journey. My first job, I was going back to D.C. to work for Bob Stump, Congressman Bob Stump, who was a dear family friend. And he just happened to be at lunch one day with Barbara Barrett, who was back there as a deputy administrator of the FAA at the time. And he shared with her my resume, and she said, she doesn't belong on the Hill. She belongs at the White House. So out of the blue, I got a call from White House personnel to come back for some interviews, which I wasn't expecting, but it was, it's just one thing leads to another. And so my resume, I didn't know Barbara Barrett, my resume got me in the door at the White House. And so that was my first job out of school, which then led me to my next job working for Governor Kaler in Nebraska, which then led me to working for Fife Symington. So, it's just everything you do leads to the next. Ultimately going to law school and working for a small boutique law firm that specialized in land use and zoning, which I was kind of perfectly suited for. I love the idea of creating things and building things. I love the idea of helping people create value in their land. I'm a huge believer in private property and private property rights. And I was blessed to go to work for an attorney who was the best in that field and had the best clients in Arizona, quite frankly. And I was with him for 4 years when he came in and told me he was leaving to go to work for our biggest client. And so I'm like, well, great. Here I am 4 years out of law school and hitched my wagon to a guy who was leaving me behind. But turns out he was very instrumental in encouraging me to start my own law firm, which I did. I ended up, it was interesting at the time, all the big law firms then came after me because they wanted me to work for them because they knew the book of business I could bring.
Right.
And, the original partner said, no, do your own thing and I'll be your first client. And I ended up keeping all of the clients. And so relatively new out of school, I had the biggest real estate development clients in Arizona. And so for the next, 3 decades, 2.5 decades at that point, I worked my tail off.
What year did that start for you? What year was that first year of your practice?
I graduated in 1994, and I started my law firm in 1998. And
so right in the middle of the construction
it was
wave.
Crazy. Yeah, I called it, my baseball career. And then running my own law firm, it was like the more successful you got, the more people you hired, the more you had to keep business coming in. And meanwhile, I'm having babies, ended up, I've got 4 kids. And you just get up every day and go. And then I was a single mom having to juggle all of that. But you just get up and do it. But it was a 24-hour-a-day treadmill. And, again, I was blessed. When I look back at the projects that I've been involved in, what I would consider the biggest and best master plan communities in Arizona, in fact, in the West, both Arizona, California, and in Hawaii, I had some little piece of that, part of that. And I would, as a lawyer, I'd much prefer to be able to point to Kierland or Verrado or Eastmark or Silverleaf or whatever and say I had something to do with that than putting my name on a legal brief. With all due respect to my colleagues in the legal profession, it's kind of fun to be able to show my kids, I did this and I, did that. So.
Isn't it fascinating? And I never thought about reputation when I was a kid, but I did think about what I thought of myself. And that helped me, whether I was a busboy or a dishwasher or a waiter or whatever it was I was doing, I wanted to be the best at it. Yeah. And you build that reputation. You talked about your resume being handed off to someone and did you think about that along the way, that one thing leads to another, or was it if I'm really good at this, I'm happy, and when that comes along, I'm going to be really good at that? Well,
I always just remember my father's advice to me that he would always say, there's always room for the best. There's always going to be competition. Just do your best. And I'm convinced that if you're doing what you love, I don't feel like I work. I love what I do. Right. I love solving problems for people. I love to take a challenge and turn it into a success. Oftentimes in land use cases, zoning cases can get really ugly, with different stakeholders with different opinions. And being able to work through those with neighbors and stakeholders and come to a conclusion. I was always one of those lawyers that when I got to a city council hearing, I wanted a 7-0 vote. I wanted unanimous votes. And when I did that, which was more often than not, I knew that I had done a good job for my client, but I'd done a good job for the community and the stakeholders. And I was given early on advice from a professor at ASU. He said, people support what they help create. So in all my cases, we would go out and we would find all the stakeholders and the neighbors and involve them in our process, identify issues early before they became problems. And I would always tell people, look, at the end of the day, we might not agree, on what this thing looks like, but I want you to be able to stand up there and say, we listened and we did what we could to accommodate your issues and concerns. And as a result of that, while I was practicing law, I never lost a case. And very proud of that. But sometimes it's more perspiration than inspiration.
Sure.
It's just hard work. You just do it. And no excuses, leave no stone unturned. You just work hard. And when you like it, it's not work.
Talk about the Board of Regents, because it's important work, but it's also, in the minds of many, a no-win situation.
Oh, it is a difficult task. Arizona has probably 250,000 students now enrolled in our 3 universities. We have 8 appointed members of the Board of Regents. The staff is very lean, and I'm all about lean staff and efficiency in government. But I also serve currently I'm no longer on the Arizona Board of Regents, but I serve on the Creighton University Board of Trustees. Our Board of Trustees is 4 times the size of the Arizona Board of Regents, and we have 12,000 students, right? And so you have more people managing much smaller universe of students and issues. I believe that it is time that we look at the governance structure for our universities, because the breadth and depth of what those 8 appointed members of the board, 8 plus the student regents, what they have to do and understand is just far beyond anybody. It's I've been off the board now for about 3 years. At the time, it was about a $6.5 billion enterprise. ASU alone at the time was $3.2 billion. And the issues ranging from risk management to personnel issues to curriculum issues to student conduct issues, there's just so much. I think Governor Ducey did a great job while he was governor creating a strategic board where, one of my colleagues was her professional career was in personnel issues. Another was a Harvard MBA grad, so she knew numbers really well. I was brought on really for my background and expertise in real estate. So each of us brought to the table a different skill set. So collectively, we could try and cover the beachfront of issues that come to the board. But, and back to the staff issue, we have fewer staff members. And this, again, my data is a couple of years stale. But at the time, we had fewer staff members, the Arizona Board of Regents staff, than we did when we had about half the number of students. And if you compare our structure to other states, we're probably too lean to cover the issues that are required to be covered on a daily basis.
When you look at how much and the transformation of Arizona State University, I've joked about this on the air, but I was being serious. When I moved here, it was known as one of the biggest party schools in the country. Yeah. And that was its reputation. And it seemed like many at the university was happy about that reputation. But what Dr. Crow did, making it the most innovative in the country, and the engineering school and Cronkite School and the business school, it is transformed into something different. And I'm not trying to dump on any of the other 2 schools, but because we're so close to ASU, I watch it. My producer Julia is a graduate from Cronkite. Yeah. The people in this building that we get to associate ourselves with, these are brilliant young people that are getting a world-class education. Are you proud of what ASU and the other state universities are and have become?
Yes, I am. And I do believe a lot of the economic development activity that we see in Arizona is that there's a direct correlation with the university. I had a situation with ASU probably 15, 20 years ago now, having to do with a zoning case I was working on, the former General Motors Proving Grounds, which is now Eastmark, and Boeing. It was a big kind of strategic piece of the puzzle that I had to manage. And we ended up in a room with Dr. Crow and the site leader from Boeing's Apache plant. And the site leader basically said, we need more engineers that can do X, Y, and Z, or we need more engineers. We're not getting them. And Dr. Crow said, tell me what you need and we'll produce them. And it happened. And so that's what he does. And he does it probably better than any other university president in the country. And I know he has a lot of detractors out there, but I can tell you he has transformed not only the university, but the ecosystem in Arizona for innovation.
Well, there's also it's a revolving. It's I would say it feeds on itself, because the other criticism used to be that Arizona State had all these kids here in the Valley. They graduate from Arizona State University as in-state students, and then there really was not much for them to do in their arena, and they take that education and they go to another state and they would become great in another states. So there wasn't the careers here.
Right.
So now it seems like we do have the careers, the diversity of our economy, and we now have the students coming out that are feeding those industries, and it seems like it's building on itself.
It really is. 2008, you probably recall when the real estate bubble burst in Arizona.
Oh, I remember.
And at the time, I was executive vice president of DMB, which is a big real estate development company, and we just, we were staring, at ourselves in the mirror, realizing that the real estate industry is not a base industry. And for us to succeed, our economy needed to be diversified. And along with many organizations and others, including Dr. Crow, we all realized we've got to step up to the plate and grow beyond just real estate, and we did. We did, and that was through the concerted effort of a lot of people to diversify this economy, and it is far more resilient today than it was in 2008, far less dependent on the real estate industry for economic activity. And, you look at what's going on in the semiconductor space, and, with TSMC being the largest direct foreign investment in America at $65 billion and the additional $20 billion at Intel, all this stuff has happened because of the environment that's been created really by good, strong conservative leadership now for several generations.
Great policy. When you look at, again, you talk about a collaborative. You've got the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, which now Danny Seiden is with, but the previous regime that was there before, the working together with municipalities, the city of Phoenix and other cities, and working with these international organizations and investment, that had to be a collaborative. It wasn't the governor, it wasn't the legislature, it wasn't any individual entity, but that collaborative had to be a big issue in making that happen.
There's no question. And leadership is a big part of that. Anybody who goes back and reflects on Governor Ducey's tenure, he woke up every day saying, what can we do to move this economy forward? And so he put a lot of personal time, effort, and interest in attracting, obviously setting the table from a regulatory and tax environment, but personal effort in going out and finding those companies and bringing them here.
But I think this is where you fit into the category with the people we're talking about, because it's vision. You've got Dr. Crow and a vision of what could be and a willingness to make it happen. You talk about Governor Ducey and having a vision for the diversification of our economy.
Oh, yeah.
I think you fit into that category from the little that I know of and I've seen of you is that you have a vision of what something should be. And you talk about your successes in real estate development. I will tell you, I worked out in Verrado when it was being built. And I remember people saying, what in the world are we building this in the middle of nowhere for? But the vision of what the West Valley was becoming and how beautiful that area has become. It has been, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it's been an example of what you can accomplish.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of people say, that the market is what the market is. And in certain cases, that's true. But there's also a way to make a market by delivering something to the market that they didn't know they wanted or needed. And that's what we did at Verrado. We sold the first $1 million house in Buckeye almost 20 years ago now at Verrado. And, those housing prices have just, that value creation, back to what I said earlier, how fulfilling it is to help others create value And that's the Verrado story.
Well, and the community that it built, because we have neighborhoods. Yeah. We don't necessarily always have communities. Yes. I built the preschool out there. I was the electrical contractor that built the preschool out there. But when you go into that neighborhood, if you drive by it on the 10, you don't see it. You see houses. Mm-hmm. When you go into the community, the grocery stores and the restaurants, and it has built its own community. The golf course, it is a little community unto itself, which is what I think the row houses. Yeah. It's created a community that people love to be a part of. If you live there because you love the community.
And that was all intentional. I mean, the grocery store, you mentioned the grocery store. When that was built, we had, working with Bashas at the time, the aisles in the grocery store had to be lower than eye level, so that when you're walking down the aisles, you could see who's in the aisle next to you, so you could see your neighbor. So the intentionality of everything with the curb-separated sidewalks, the trees, the partnerships with the school districts, the partnerships with Luke Air Force Base, all these partnerships were very intended to kind of jumpstart community that occurs in older neighborhoods over generations.
Right.
We wanted to create those opportunities immediately so people felt like they belonged there. And so it is a vision. You know, when I look back over my campaign for governor and what I wanted to do, and just reflecting after having lost, my biggest disappointment was not being able to implement what I thought were great ideas and plans for Arizona, from education to state land reform to economic development, all sorts of things that we could do. And so you wake up thinking woulda, coulda, shoulda, if you had the opportunity. But it's about leading people toward articulating the vision and then leading them towards that. I've learned over my career, in particular in the real estate development world, sitting in rooms with people far smarter than I am, traffic engineers, civil engineers, architects, people who are brilliant. But I'm often called upon to lead those teams. Mm-hmm. They don't do what I do, and I don't attempt to do what they do, but people crave leadership. And when you don't have leadership or somebody who can articulate the vision, vacuums get created and vacuums get filled, as we all know. And far too often in our government, at all levels, if you don't have that vision and that leadership, vacuums will just happen, and bad things typically happen.
Yeah, and so there's so many there. I want to ask you so many policy questions. It would probably be boring for this podcast, because we're at a time where the expertise in what you've done, I think the advice you can give, whether it's the state land trust and education dollars and how we manage that properly for the long term. Mm-hmm. There's the question about zoning and how we build more affordable housing, and if we could get municipalities to understand if you can build them less expensively, you can sell them less expensively. At least that's my belief in it. But the expertise you have in that area, do you find yourself wanting to walk into some of those rooms and shake people? I'm not asking you to name names.
Yeah, all the time. And I'm dealing with several issues right now for clients where, and I'm a big believer in local government, city and county government. I don't like the state telling the local governments what to do, just like I don't like the federal government telling the states what to do. And yet we're in this situation now where affordability in Arizona is just dropping dramatically. A year ago, 61% of people could buy a house. Today, it's 21%. Mm-hmm. Those aren't good numbers. And so then you get government wanting to come in and mandate affordability and mandate, which is terrible too. So you've got to, from my perspective, it doesn't work. California's been at it for a long time, and the median cost of a house in California is now $800,000, almost double the national average. So that doesn't work. In Arizona, we have a land constraint environment, and the state land department, well, the government, public government at all levels, is the major landowner in the state of Arizona. 83% of land is owned by the public. And the state land department owns, sitting on 9.2 million acres of land. Not that we're going to ever develop all of it, only a fraction of it. But we have to figure out how to get that land into the marketplace, because you have to have land in order to build houses. And then these cities have got to figure out a way to allow, the home building community to build houses.
And don't you think, and I don't want to get in the weeds, but this conversation is so interesting to me, and I don't know when I'm ever going to be able to ask you these questions again, but don't you think that there is a market out there, myself included? I don't have a ton of money, but I know people that would invest. If you could convince a municipality that we're going to build something that's affordable. That doesn't mean low quality. High quality, smaller structure, maybe on a smaller piece of land. Maybe some of the requirements are taken away where you can build it, where you have teachers and first-year lawyers, people with secure jobs can afford to live in the neighborhoods where they work. You build that community faster. Do you see fault in that argument, or do you see validity in it?
I think, well, back to the Verrado example, there's great validity in that. We also developed DC Ranch and Silverleaf, the company I worked for 30 years. And we found in that environment, the values were going up so rapidly, it was pricing a lot of people out of the market. So our subsequent project, Verrado, a primary goal was that we have a broad range of housing opportunities so that first time, the renter, the first time home buyer, the move up buyer, the retiree could all live in the same community.
Which is great about Verrado, because you can drive through and see houses that take your breath away.
Yes.
And then quaint houses where you can see young families with kids playing in the front yard.
So that was the intentionality of the developer, to create that broad range of housing opportunities so that the teacher could live next door to the doctor, who could live next door to grandma and grandpa. Every life stage could occur in one community. Again, I'm a big believer in the market. And right now we have a market imbalance. We have a shortage of housing in the Phoenix metro area of 270,000 units. That's because we've created an environment, a tax and a regulatory environment, that are bringing the jobs here and people here. Thank God we don't have hurricanes, we don't have fires, we don't have all the stuff.
My family's in the path.
Yeah. So we don't have all those things that are driving people away from other areas. So we're an attractive place. So we have this big imbalance. And so we have a supply and demand imbalance. So we have to provide more supply. So I'm not a fan of the government mandating that supply. I'm a fan of the market figuring it out so that we can keep prices down. The more houses you have, the lower,
So here's a real question. I just sat down with somebody yesterday to ask their advice, and this is a real question for anybody that's watching, and this is your expertise. I have a background in construction. I was an electrical contractor, been around the construction industry my entire life. I would love myself to have a project of a fourplex or something like that to build, to sell it or whatever I would do with it. The building of the project does not scare me. It is everything you have to accomplish to get that project approved that has turned me away from trying to make this happen. I can't be unique in that. There have to be other people like me.
You are not. And I will protect the jurisdiction that I'm battling with right now, but I'm working on a 8-unit subdivision, 8-house subdivision, and then a parcel that is about 6,000 acres in the same jurisdiction. And we're having issues and problems like you would not believe in both instances. And it led me on the 8-lot subdivision, it led me to say to somebody in this jurisdiction to not be surprised when the state legislature comes and tells you that you're going to do this. You've got to figure out how. We have a housing problem, we have a housing affordability problem, and if you're going to make every applicant jump through these hoops like this, you're going to be told what to do by the state, and you have no one to blame. Figure this out. I will also tell you, I spent about half my time for 10 years working in California, and it's a nightmare, or at least it was a nightmare. It probably still is. But I had a home builder recently tell me that the page is turned in some jurisdictions in California where they're asking people, they're eliminating barriers, they're eliminating regulatory and permitting barriers. If you can build a house, come and we'll allow you to build the house. Never in my wildest dreams did I think doing, an 8-lot subdivision in Arizona would be more difficult than doing something in California.
But how do you change the mindset in people that when you talk about a regulatory reduction or allowing people to do things, that you are not automatically reducing quality? Because I don't
believe you are.
But how do you change that mindset and the bureaucracy that you face every day when you're arguing about this?
Well, when you talk about needing a permit for a ceiling fan, that's probably a bad example, but there are requirements for permits that are not necessary. They're not.
I've got stories.
I'm sure you do. And it is, as a recovering zoning lawyer, it's a full employment act for lawyers. You shouldn't have to go hire a lawyer to get a permit to build a house.
That's my fear, is to do a project like that. I know in my head, off the top of my head, what I would build and what it would cost to build and the time it would take to build it.
Yeah.
What I don't know is what the expense would be in getting it through zoning and through planning and getting approval that's going to add to the cost of construction of what I'm going to have to sell it for in order to make any money.
Right. No, that's our biggest conundrum. And on the bigger projects, on master plan communities, whether it's 1,000 acres, 5,000 acres, 6,000 acres, imagine what the developer who has to acquire the property, and it's going to be a 20 or 30-year project. You don't know who the council is going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. How do you underwrite the risk? Going back to Verrado, which probably had $100 million of risk in the ground before they put a stick in the air to build a house. Mm-hmm. So how do you underwrite the political risk? Now, I will tell you that the zoning that I did on these master plan communities was very unique because we did some things to eliminate a lot of that future political risk, to give the developer enough certainty to be able to put that kind of money in the ground. So we